Hi there and welcome to another HOI4 modding lesson on the Iron Workshop. After I posted the last modding lesson, I have decided to run a poll among you guys so that you can tell me which lesson you want to see. And most of you have chosen to see how to create new buildings in HOI4. Now, a lot of you also asked to see how to create new bookmarks, new starting dates. And don't worry, that will probably be next week, so I won't forget you guys as well. But in this lesson, we're going to learn how to create new buildings. As with previous lessons, we have 7 steps in creating our new buildings. So the first one is to create our mod file. Then we need to create our folder structure and copy our relevant files. After that, we have creating the building entry in the relevant file. Then the graphics, the localization, and we will also have to do some adjustments to the construction UI, user interface. And lastly, I'll be talking about some extra syntax and some comments about things that I encountered while working on this lesson. Also, before we continue, some important notes about creating buildings in HOI4, and right after that, we'll get right into creating this thing. Before we go on with the lesson, there are a few things that I need to talk about that we should consider before we start creating our new buildings. So first of all, we have 3 types of buildings in HOI4. If we go here, you see that we have state buildings, we have shared buildings, and we have province buildings. So state buildings are buildings that you can build multiple times, that you can upgrade, and unlike civilian factories where you just add more of these buildings can be upgraded to another level, so you can build on top of an existing building, and they don't take up a slot in your building slots in a state. Shared buildings are buildings that you only build once, and then if you need another building, you build a completely new building. You do not upgrade an existing one. And these buildings do take up a slot in your state building slots. And lastly, we have province buildings, which are built on individual provinces. And like the state buildings, they can be upgraded. So it's quite important for you before you start creating your new building to know which type of building you want to create, since that will affect the syntax that we will be using during the creation of our new building. And of course, I will explain how to create each type of these buildings. Another thing that I want to mention is that the graphics, the 2-dimensional graphics for our new building, are using something called strip files, where you have many icons in one file that are divided equally in size, and the game will use the icon that you are telling the game to use. So there's no need to create an individual new file for your building. It does have its advantages, but using free software like Paint.net, it's a bit difficult to manipulate and make these files correctly. But during this lesson, I will show you how to do that with the buildings file. Another thing that you should note is that when you're editing or changing the values of your new building or even existing in-game buildings, in order for you to see the changes, you will have to restart your game completely. So for example, if I'm changing the cost of building civilian factories, I will not see that change until I restart my game. And one last note, if you are changing an existing building, for example, if you're changing civilian factories to something else, you will have to change the reference to this building in every other file where it's mentioned in the game. You can do that by using the search and replace function of Notepad++, but it might still be difficult since you may not know which files are affected and which files you will have to copy to your mod. And this is something that you will just have to search manually for. Okay, so let's begin with creating our new mod file. Let's go to Mod Tools, Create Mod. We'll call it the Krusty Krab Building Mod, a very short and sweet name. This will be our version, and this one I'll call the Krusty Krab. and we'll just go with gameplay. Doesn't really matter. Create mod, and we have successfully created our mod file. And now let's move on to the next stage, which is creating our folder structure and files. Okay, now let's proceed to creating our folder and file structure. So I'll open my new Krusty Krab folder mod, and we'll start copying the files that we need. So the first folder that we will need is the common folder. So let's create that. Inside of that, we have the buildings folder. So let's create that as well. I'm just gonna copy the name to make sure that I get it right. And I'll copy this one over here. Excellent. That's all we need from the common folder. Next, I'm going to copy some interface files. So we will create the interface folder. Excellent. In this folder, we will need two files. So the first one is country construction view.gui file. So let's copy that over. And another one called country state view.gfx file. So we'll copy that over as well. Okay, so these are all the files that we need from the interface folder. And now we will need the GFX folder for the building strip file. Inside of that, we have the interface folder. So let's create that. And here we have buildings. And now we have something called building icon strip.dds. So I'm going to copy it over. Excellent. And now let's go back. In here we have a folder called, and now we will need the localization folder to give the correct localization to our new building. And I'm just going to take the buildings file. These are all the files and folders that we need if we're not creating the 3D graphics. And as I said, in this lesson, we're not going to be touching on that. So we are finished with step number 2. And now we will proceed to step number 3, creating our building entry. Okay, now let's create our building entry in the buildings file. So I'll go to common, buildings. And in here, I will use the building that's closer to the building that I want to create. So for example, if I want to create a state building, I will take an entry from a state building, for example, an anti-air building. If I want to create a shared building, then I will use as my template a shared building, for example, the industrial complex, which is the civilian factory. And if I want to create a province building, then I will use as my template a province building, for example, the bunker, okay? So it very much depends on what you want to create, but for the example of this lesson, we'll be creating a shared building. So I'm going to take the industrial complex, I'm going to copy this whole entry from its opening bracket until the closing bracket. I'm going to copy this and just put it at the top of the file, so it's easier to locate. And now let's change its name. So it's going to be the Krusty Krab. So now we have a couple of things here to understand. So we have show on map 6. So what does that mean? That means that when it displays this building, this determines how many times the 3D graphic will appear on the map. So in this case, 6 times in one state, right? It's spread between provinces. Next, we have the base cost. So what's the cost in a civilian building, in civilian factories to construct this building? And what's the base cost conversion if you want to convert it to a military factory? Now, since Krusty Krab isn't really going to be a civilian factory that we will be converting, I'm just going to remove this line. Now, this one is a variable that tells the game that that this building contributes to production. But we can change this to other modifiers, but I will talk about that towards the end of the lesson. I'm just going to keep it in here. The icon frame is the icon that the user will see when he wants to build this building in the construction interface, and we will be changing that very soon. This is the max level, so the maximum amount that we can build this structure in the state. This determines the type of the building, so if it shares slots, then it's a shared building, okay? If it's a province building, then you will see here it says provincial, yes, so that's a province building. And if it's just a state building that's upgradable, then it will not have the shared slots syntax. Next, we have value. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure what value means. I just think that this is something that has to do with the AI and how it prioritizes the building, but I could be wrong. If you have more information about this and you know what value is, I would love to hear about that in the comments. Let me know and we'll be sure that everybody else knows. So essentially we have our building done. It's already in the game, but there are a couple of more things to do. Let's move on to our next stage, which is creating the building 2D graphic. All right, now let's create our building 2D graphic, the icon that the user will see when building our new building. So our building graphic is located in GFX, interface, buildings, building icon strip. Let's open that in paint.net. So I'm just going to drag the file here and click on open. Now, as you can see, all the buildings in the vanilla game are located on this one file. And what happens is that in the file, when you mention icon frame 1, that means that the game goes to this file. It starts counting from 1. So since this is the first image, then it uses this image for the Krusty Krab. Then it goes to infrastructure and it looks for the icon frame. And since that is number 3, it uses this one and so on and so forth. So quite easy to understand. It makes things a lot easier because now we don't need to create new entries in the GFX file for this thing, but we will still need to update the data about this file and let it know that we've added new frames that now the game has to take into account, and I will explain exactly what I mean after we're finished with the file. So to create the new graphic for our Krusty Krab, it's a little bit difficult since we don't have a very clear way to see how the game separates these files. So we will have to do that by hand. But it's not an impossible task, so let's see how do we do that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the last file here. And I'm going to use the selection tool. Now, one thing that really helps here is if you have these grids, and if you don't see them, just click these icons here. It will show you the rulers and the pixel grid. Okay, so those are very helpful when editing files like these. So just zoom in on this thing. And now I'm going to use the selection tool, the rectangle select. And I'm just going to select what is probably in the middle here. Okay, so like this. Now we can assume that the other file goes all the way like this, right? So this one is for this file and the other half is for this one. So right in the middle between these two files. So I'm now going to copy this. I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to paste. Now in here, I'm going to create my new graphic. Now here's a little tip on how to create the background. So I'm going to select this whole thing like this inside, right? So just the inside graphic, not to go too far, to leave these dark edges. And I'm going to now select the colors. I'm going to use the color picker and I will select this first bright pixel. You see that here it selects it as the primary color. Now I'm going to click these two arrows, and I'm going to select the darkest pixel at the bottom here. Okay, so now we have these two colors, and what we're going to do is to create a gradient. So I'm going to go to gradient, and while I have the selection on, I'm just going to drag it like this, more or less. Now I will not make it perfect here right now, since it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this lesson, but obviously you can play around with it until you get the perfect results. Great, so now that we have approximately the background that we need, I'll just going to stick the graphics in here. So now what I'm going to do is to grab my Krusty Krab graphic, which I accidentally have on my computer. No idea how it got here. I'm going to select this whole thing. I'm going to copy. Go back to my graphic, select this section here, and in here I'm going to select paste into new layer. In the pop-up that appears, I'm going to click on keep canvas size. Excellent. And now let's resize this thing until it fits completely into the icon. Excellent. So now we have our icon of the Krusty Krab. That's good. And I'm going to go to image, flatten. That way it will combine all of these images together. And what we need to do now is to copy this individual icon into our big icon strip. We will need to be a bit clever about this, since obviously if I'm just going to put my new file here instead of the existing one, then it's going to block it. So we know the file size for this image, right? We know that it's 46 by 46. So basically what we need is to have a file that's approximately this size plus 46, right? Since it needs to fit another icon. So for us to expand this image, what I'm going to have to do, I'm going to go to image, canvas size, and in here we see that the current size of this image is 644, so we will need to add to it another 46. That comes down to 690. And here I'm going to have to select the anchor, so in which direction it's going to extend the image. So I'm going to select top left and click OK. So we now have space for our new icon. So let's just zoom in, go over there. I'm going to obviously have to delete this weird graphic that the program has put. And instead of it, we are going to copy our new file. So I'm going to select the file, Control A, Control C, and we are going to copy it over here and just move it into its correct position. Right about here. Okay, that looks just about right. As you can see, it fits completely at the end of the file and here in the middle. So we have our additional graphic. A bit complicated, but as I said, not impossible. So let's just zoom out. And obviously we will now need to resave the file. Before saving the file, I have to let the game know that I've added another frame, another icon to this strip file. And this is something that you have to do with all files that are built this way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open my interface folder in the Krusty Krab mode. Krusty Krab interface. I'm going to open the country statesview.gfx file. In here, I want to locate my building strip file. So I'll press Ctrl F. You can just type strip in this example. And as you can see here, we have the entry for this file. And it says that the number of frames is 14. Now, that's true for the original file, but since we've added one, now it's 15. So I'm going to update it to 15 and save the file. And now the game knows that it has 15 frames, so it starts counting them correctly. And now let's save the file. So save as buildings icon strip. And in here, I'm going to select this option and click on OK. Excellent. We have our new file. That is all we needed to do to create our 2D graphic. And now let's continue to creating our building localization. Okay, so to create our building localization, we are obviously going to go into the localization folder, open the buildings English file, and just add another line with the syntax of our new building. So let's just copy it over. And just follow the exact example as the entries are for the other buildings. So just like that, Krusty Krab. Now, another thing that I would like to add is the description for my building. So I'm going to do the following, just copy the syntax of the building and add DESC, just like here with infrastructure. So what's the description going to be? Krusty Krab is the home of the Krabby Patty, the best burger in the whole of Bikini Bottom. Excellent. And we can also add the plural version of our building. So let's go ahead and do that. Krusty Krabbies. Excellent. So let's save the file. And that is all we need to do to create the localization for our new building. If you follow this lesson 1-to-1, and if you're creating the building exactly as I have mentioned, then you should not have too many problems with the user interface. But there are cases where adding another building or a couple of buildings can cause some problems with the user interface. So in this example, I created another building, the Super Krusty Krab, just to show you that problem. So if we'll go into the game and we'll go to construction, you see that we have our two buildings here, but because of that, it pushed the nuclear reactor all the way down. And now it's overlapping the interface at the bottom. So this is what we can fix by editing the .GUI files. And let's just give it a try right now. So let's open our Krusty Krab folder, go to interface, and open the construction view.gui file. Excellent. Now in here, we'll have to locate the relevant section to us, this section in here. And to find it, I'm going to be using a console command. Now you will have access to the console if you are in debug mode, so make sure to enable that. To open the console, press the tilde key on your keyboard. That's the key that's to the left of the one key. And in the console, type the following, GUI, G-U-I. And it will open this function that shows you all kinds of properties of graphical elements in the game. It's very useful. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to put my mouse cursor over this section. And you see here that it says possible constructions. So this whole section has something called possible constructions in it. So this is what I'm going to look for in my GUI file. So let's go back to the file, press Ctrl F, and go to possible constructions. Okay, so this whole section between this opening bracket and this one, it deals with this section, okay? So what we'll have to do here is to push this background a little bit to the bottom so that the nuclear reactor fits inside of this section. Now, if I put my mouse cursor over this section that I need to move down a little bit, you see that it has something called construction BG3. So let's find that in the file. Here it is. And I'm just going to have to push it down a little bit. Now we see that the current Y coordinates, the location on the Y axis of this graphic is 380. So let's change it to something like 450 and save the file. And now if I go back to my game, you see that it did indeed move down a little bit. Okay, now we did move it a little bit too far, so let's just pick it up a little bit. I'll change it to 420. And this seems more or less okay, but we will also have to move these icons down as well, and then this section as well. To move these icons, I will have to locate the entry for the province buildings. So if we go back to the file, we see something called province item grid. So that is the one we need. So let's move those down a little bit as well. Okay, we'll need them a little bit down than here. I'm not going to do this whole thing now. It doesn't really matter. I think that you got the idea. All you need to do is to work on this file a little bit, adjust things, move them accordingly, and then things will look fine for your new building. So with that done, and we now know that the building works since we do have the Krusty Krab. Let me just disable this function. We have the Krusty Krab with our description, and we can build it in all of these states. It has the icon. Now that we have our building working in the game, let's move on to the last step, our extra syntax and comments. All right, now a couple of comments and recommendations that I have for when you're creating your new building. So first of all, I would recommend that to properly test your building, you set the value for the cost at 1. And that way you can build the building instantly. But please remember that these things will only get updated and changed once you restart your game. So for example, right now I changed it to 1, but in the game, the cost is still high. So it will not update until I've restarted my game. The next thing are the modifiers that you can apply to your building. So in here I have general production, and that means that these buildings, the Krusty Krab, will increase production of all buildings in my country. But I can change that. So for example, if I go to the HOI4 Wikipedia or HOI4 Wiki, in here I can find all kinds of modifiers that I can attach to my buildings. Now I will say now that it's not very clear which modifiers do work with buildings, which do not. And you will have to test these around and see what works for you. But one thing that I would like to mention is, for example, the monthly population modifier. So if I were to add the monthly population modifier to my building, what would happen is the following. So if I go to construction and I build a lot of these buildings, let's just let them finish. You will notice that they do not affect the population increase in the state. They affect it completely on the whole country. And it lists all of them, all the buildings that I have constructed in my country. And that can create a lot of problems. So you need to be quite careful when you're applying these modifiers to your new buildings. Okay, so that is it about creating new building in HOI4. It can be a bit challenging. If you have any issues, please let me know in the comments and I will do my best to help you. Hopefully you will come up with cool new buildings that we can all use in HOI4. Please note that a lot of these things also work for Europa Universalis 4 buildings, especially how you edit the graphics. So that might help you there as well. That is basically all. Thank you very much for watching and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye. Hey guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. Check out these other videos on the Iron Workshop that you might enjoy as well. Please consider supporting the Iron Workshop on Patreon. This will allow the channel to grow and become even better. Thank you.